You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
Hey guys, welcome back. You're listening to the second part of last week's episode. Let's jump back in.
So before I get into the facts, let me just be clear about what I'm talking about. We're not going to get too much into the technicalities. I'm just going to keep this high level. All right. In Google Ads, you have keywords. Keywords are how you tell Google who you want to see your ads, right? I type in sell my house fast. I generally want people who type in sell my house fast to see my ads. That's how it works. But there's another layer of that called match types. And basically, match types control how much leeway Google has in terms of interpreting that keyword. So it used to be if I had an exact match keyword, the only people who would see my ads are the people who would type in that exact keyword. No variations, no differences. They have to type in that exact keyword. All right. Now, phrase match keywords were a little bit wilder than that. Okay, they've got to include these words, but they could come in different orders and you could add things to the end. So if I targeted sell my house as a phrase match keyword, I would show up when someone typed in sell my house, but I would also show up in sell my house fast or sell my house Arkansas, right? Or I want to sell my house. Okay, as long as they say sell my house, it's fine. And you can add things on. And then we had broad match keywords, which were basically just topics. I say sell my house, Google's going to show my ad to anybody who's interested in the topic of selling their house. And that could mean that they typed in sell my house, but maybe it also means they had typed in Zillow or they typed in, I don't know, MLS listings or something. Okay. So we had this system where you would give Google more or less control over how they interpreted that keyword. And that was the primary lever you had to pull to improve your lead quality. Okay, if you want more motivated sellers, the system used to work this way. If you want more motivated sellers, you got to choose, I'm sure you've heard this before, motivated keywords. So sell my house fast is going to be more motivated, the thinking went, than sell my house, right? Just like if I type in buy shoes, that means one thing. But if I type in, buy Air Jordans, 1998, red size 10, well, that means a completely different thing. And so the thinking went, you want more motivated sellers, your lead quality is off, you got to change your keywords. Target more motivated keywords. Target exact match keywords, etc. And that worked for a long time. But I'm telling you, if that's the strategy now, if that's your strategy to generate motivated sellers now, friend, you are not going to make it. And I'm not being dramatic. It's just something we deal with literally every day. And you're not going to make it because the fact of the matter is exact match keywords aren't that exact. And phrase match keywords are very broad nowadays. And this trend of Google basically forcing more and more variation to show up in your keywords to sort of take away more of the control you have over who sees your ads, this trend is not slowing down, friends. This is speeding up. And my opinion, my guess, is that in the next 5 years or so, we probably get rid of keywords altogether. I'm recording this in 2023. This year was the first year in Google's keynote on Google Ads this year, was the first time they used the phrase keywordless future. The keywordless future. And in fact, for most of Google's new campaign types, performance max and demand gen and so on, you don't need keywords at all. It's interesting, right? So the trend here is that things are more complex. Things are harder to predict. And because of that, Google knows, well, hey, you're not going to be able to handle it, or at least they think that. And so what they're doing is slowly chipping away at the amount of control that you have over who you target and why. Ultimately, we'll probably get to a point where you just pop in your website and they figure it out for you. And in fact, you can already do that if you want to do that. I don't recommend it, but you could test it. Now, all these things are happening at the same time as one final part of this process, which of course is what's happening in the housing market itself. As I think most people would say, your market might be different. You tell me, look around. Are you in a buyer's market right now or a seller's market? Most of you are going to say you're in a seller's market. And it doesn't mean that in a seller's market, real estate investing doesn't work. Of course, it always has. And we've got lots of historical examples of investors who made tons and tons of money. And there are many, many investors making tons and tons of money using online advertising for motivated sellers right now. I know because a bunch of them are our clients, right? So it's not that it can't work. The problem is, if you imagine a bullseye, or a dartboard, I should say. Right? Imagine a dartboard. Motivated sellers are always the center of the dartboard, right? The dartboard represents the whole housing market. Motivated sellers are a relatively small chunk of that right in the middle. All right, that's always how it is. There are many more sellers than there are motivated sellers, right? Now, in a seller's market, what tends to happen is that center of the dartboard, the bullseye, that bullseye shrinks. Okay, there are less motivated sellers as a percentage of the overall market than there traditionally have been. And so the target for your campaigns is shrinking. It's smaller. Now that by itself wouldn't be the end of the world, right? It's happened a bunch of times, particularly at AdWords Nerds. We've been through many of these markets before. We get it. So no problem. Let's just do what we always do. When our target is shrinking, let's just tighten our match types and control our keywords. And right. We can't do that anymore. So what's happening is you have this complexification of the system in general, while Google is reducing the amount of control that you have as the advertiser, and while the bullseye of motivated sellers as a percentage of the market is shrinking. And when you combine all those things, you get declining lead quality. And in fact, in many of the investors that we talk to, people come to us and want to work together, or people who are doing online marketing or wherever, this is by far the biggest complaint. It's that, look, Google is good at generating leads now. If you put money in Google, you can generate leads. The problem is they're not motivated. That's what we hear. They don't want to sell. They're not motivated. Now, you know why? It's not because, hey, this person picked the wrong keyword. It's not because, hey, they built the campaign wrong. It's not because, hey, I'm just a bad investor and yada, yada, yada. There are structural reasons why this is happening. Now, the question, of course, after that is what to do about it. What do you do about it? If you can't target effectively, and by the way, I'm not saying like throw out your keywords, I'm being a little dramatic for the podcast. Keywords still have a place. We still use them all the time, right? So I'm not saying throw them out. But if that's not an effective targeting mechanism for improving lead quality, what is? And here is the mindset shift I'm going to give you. This is what we're doing, okay? This is what we're doing with our clients. And this is, I think, the single biggest shift you need to make for the next 5-10 years, maybe longer. Because if you look out at society, what's happening right now in society in tech is the rise of AI, our continued use of algorithmic decision-making tools, right? The way Google Ads flags your account for suspension is through AI now. It's not a person, it's through AI. So when you are interacting with these systems, you got to change how you think about them. Okay, remember, they're complex, they're not complicated. It's not a machine anymore. All right, these systems are not machines where you just got to get in there and you got to be a good enough mechanic. That's not how you should think about it. You should think about it like training an animal. Think about it like training an animal, a smart animal.
Want to find motivated seller leads online, but don't know where to start? Download our free Motivated Seller Keyword Report today. AdWords nerds have spent over $5 million this year researching the most profitable keywords for finding motivated seller leads. And you can grab these exact keywords when you download our report at www.adwordsnerds.com/keywords.
Okay, how do you train an animal? It's very different from the way you work with a machine, right? If I want my car to do something, there's a sequence of steps I go through to make my car do it, and it does it. And if it doesn't do it, that means it's broken, and I get under the hood and I fix it. All right? Animals don't work that way. Animals don't work that way. Every animal is a little different. Your dog's probably very different from my dog. But there are general principles that we can use to train them, right? So if you want your dog to do something complicated, let's say you want your dog to go out and get you the paper in the morning and bring it to you. Classic, right? Bring you the paper in the morning while you're smoking a pipe with your slippers on or whatever. Let's say you want to train a dog to do that. Well, how do you do that? It's not a process of just telling the dog what you want in the right way. You can't just really explain it to him. Likewise, yelling at him isn't going to do anything about it, right? Yelling at him's not going to get him to figure it out. He doesn't know how to do it. So how do you train him to do it? Well, the way that you actually train dogs to do these kind of complicated tasks is through reinforcement. So the difference is you're not so much worried about what happens before the thing that the dog does. What you do is reinforce it when it happens. So the process of training, instead of happening at the beginning or sort of before the task, it actually happens after. Now, of course, if I want the dog to do something complicated, it's got to get up, it's got to walk out, it's got to listen for the newspaper, it's got to walk out to get the newspaper, put it in its mouth, bring it back to me, and I'm in my chair, and it's going to drop it at my feet, and it's going to sit or whatever, right? There's a whole sequence of events. Of course, I can't just wait for the dog to randomly do that and then reinforce it, because it's never going to randomly do that. It's too complicated. So what you do is you break up that behavior into all sorts of intermediate steps, and you chain those together with reinforcement. So for example, I might put the newspaper in the kitchen, just on the floor, and don't say anything. And whenever the dog goes up to the newspaper and sniffs it, I give it a treat. And I might just do that for a week. Dog randomly walking around the house, walks up to the newspaper, immediately give it a treat. Dog's walking around, walks up to the newspaper, immediately give it a treat. And sooner or later, the dog learns, when I go to the newspaper, I give it a treat. All right. And then I move the goalposts a little bit. I stop treating the dog when it goes near the newspaper. But what I do is I treat the dog when it sniffs the newspaper, it puts its mouth near it. Then I treat it, but I only treat it then. So the dog's like, wait, I thought I was getting a treat when I went to the newspaper. It learns now to put its mouth near the newspaper, and then it gets a treat every time. And then I move the goalpost again, and I say, okay, you're only going to get the treat when you pick it up. So when the dog picks up the newspaper, gets the treat. Dog picks up the newspaper, gets the treat, right? Then I might try hiding the newspaper, and it only gets the treat when it finds it and then picks it up, right? Do you see how I'm chaining these behaviors together? But where is the training on my part? Where is the training occurring sequentially? It's not before the task. It's after it. Reinforcement can only happen when the behavior I want to reinforce has already occurred. Now let's come back to Google Ads. I'm telling you right now, all algorithms are closer to animals than they are to machines. There is no clear cause and effect, even for the people that design these algorithms. If you say, well, why did it do this particular thing? They can't tell you. They can't tell you. That's one of the reasons I don't love our algorithmic future, but that's for another podcast. These algorithms are much more like animals. And if we want to get a certain behavior out of them, we've got to get used to thinking about training these algorithms like training a dog through reinforcement. Now, for the algorithm, what it gets reinforced with, we'll stick with Google, but by the way, again, this works exactly the same for Facebook ads or whatever, but Bing ads, anything you can think of. What reinforces the algorithm is a conversion. That's like the treat for the dog, the conversion event. And a conversion event can be anything. A lot of people think that conversions means leads online, but it doesn't. It's just any event that you want to track and it happened, right? So it could be someone navigates to my About Me page. I make that a conversion. It could be someone fills out a form. I make that conversion. Someone calls me. That's a conversion. Or somebody spends 10 minutes on my website. That's a conversion, okay? I can track anything with conversions. But a conversion event is like treating the dog. It's the reinforcer, all right? Now, if we want that dog to go get us better quality leads, how do we do that? Well, what most investors do is they say, okay, well, when someone fills out my form, that's the conversion, that's the treat to the dog. All right? Anytime someone fills out the form, that's the conversion. That's the treat to the dog, all right? That's the reinforcer. And that's great. You got to do that. You got to tell Google when you're generating leads. But. Remember, what we're training the dog to do in this case. It doesn't care who filled out the form. Doesn't care. Doesn't care if they were a seller. Doesn't care if they had a house. Doesn't care if they're in your area. Just wants people to fill out the form. Now, before we would control for that, again, by controlling our keywords, but now you know that's much harder to do. So we can't just say anytime someone fills out the form, that's the thing. That would be like saying, okay, if you go near the newspaper, you get the treat. And that's cool, but it's not what we wanted. Remember, I wanted to be in my chair, in my slippers with the pipe, and the dog bring me the newspaper and then put it at my feet and then sit down. That's what I wanted. So getting next to the newspaper is cool. That's the first step. But what happens after that? And here's where the shift happens. The way you get better leads is by improving your targeting. But the way you improve your targeting is not before you generate the lead, it's after. By choosing when to reinforce the algorithm. So, for example, can you set it up so that you don't send a conversion when someone fills out your form, but only when they go to appointment? Now what the algorithm learns is that its job is not to get leads, it's to get appointments. Very different behavior. Can you make it so that the algorithm doesn't get reinforced when someone fills out the form, but only if they fill out the form in a certain way? They say a certain thing that you care about. Can you make it so that the algorithm doesn't get reinforced when it generates a phone call, but only when that phone call goes for 2 minutes or longer? How you reinforce changes the behavior you will get. And the shift we need to make here is understanding that we are in a world where the tools that we use are much more like animals than they are like machines. It's not a matter of pushing the button and getting the dollar. And then if you didn't get the dollar, that means someone messed up and they didn't push the button. Usually, lead quality problems are caused by a lack of reinforcement. Now, there could be a variety of reasons why that is. Could be because you haven't set it up. Could be because you don't know how. Could be because you don't have a lot of people in your market, and so you don't get a lot of appointments even when it goes well. There could be a lot of reasons. Could be your budget is a problem. You're getting bid out of the market. I'm not saying this will solve all your problems, but what I'm saying is you need to think about this problem differently. If you have been doing online marketing and getting frustrated and saying, oh, my manager's just not doing it right, or the keywords aren't right, or whatever, I'm telling you, that was never the problem. The problem comes from thinking you're in a complicated world, but you're not. You're in a complex world. And complex worlds need to be navigated in a very specific way. In this case, by understanding you are not surrounded by machines, you are not pushing buttons and pulling levers to get a result. Instead, what you are doing is interacting with things that are, while not alive, of course, very much mimic the behavior of living things. So when you think about how am I going to improve my lead quality in Google Ads, don't think about what button do I need to push. You should be thinking about how do I train the dog? Hope that makes sense, everybody. I hope this was useful. As always, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you being here, being a part of this podcast. It means the world to me. Please leave us a review wherever you get this podcast. I read every single one. They really do brighten my day. So please, I would love that. Thank you again, and I'll be talking to you again next week. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.